The fluorescent lights of Apex Aviation's executive floor cast harsh shadows across Margaret Chen's face as she signed the termination papers. Her hand didn't tremble. It should have. "Effective immediately," she said, sliding the document across her mahogany desk toward the man in the faded blue uniform. "Security will escort you out." James Morrison had worked at Apex Aviation for 17 years. 17 years of mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and making himself invisible to people like Margaret. But yesterday everything changed. She'd found him in her office after hours, standing at her computer, his weathered hands hovering over her keyboard. "Ms. Chen, if you'd just let me explain," James began, his voice carrying the same quiet dignity he'd maintained throughout his employment. "There's nothing to explain," Margaret interrupted, her tone sharp as a blade. "You violated company policy. You accessed areas above your clearance. In this industry, trust is everything, and you broke mine." James nodded slowly, accepting the papers with hands that had cleaned this building's floors since before Margaret earned her MBA. Security appeared at the door, two young men who'd always greeted James warmly in the break room. Now they couldn't meet his eyes. As they led him away, James turned back one last time. "I hope you'll reconsider, ma'am. There's something you need to know about Flight 447. Margaret's assistant, Derek, appeared in the doorway as James disappeared into the elevator. "You did the right thing," Derek assured her. "Can't have maintenance staff snooping through executive files. What would he even want with flight schedules and maintenance logs?" Margaret didn't answer. She was already moving on to the next crisis. Apex Aviation was unveiling their revolutionary new autopilot system in 3 days, and nothing could derail it. But James Morrison's words echoed in her mind that night. Flight 447. Why did that sound familiar? The next morning brought chaos. Flight 447, a test flight carrying 50 aviation journalists and investors, had experienced a near-catastrophic systems failure 30,000 feet above the Pacific. The pilots regained control just in time, but the preliminary reports were terrifying. The new autopilot system had malfunctioned, attempting to override manual controls and send the plane into a dive. Margaret stood in the Emergency Operations Center, watching the data stream across multiple screens. Her company's future was crashing down faster than that plane almost had. "How is this possible?" she demanded. "We ran 1,000 simulations. Someone altered the base code," the lead engineer explained, his face pale. "It's subtle, wouldn't show up in standard testing. But under specific conditions, at specific altitudes, the system interprets emergency protocols backward. It's sabotage." The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire. "Who had access to these systems?" Margaret asked. The engineer pulled up the security logs. A short list of names appeared: the engineering team, senior executives, IT administrators, all thoroughly vetted, all beyond suspicion. Then Margaret remembered James standing at her computer. Her stomach dropped. "Pull the security footage from my office," she ordered. 2 nights ago. 20 minutes later, they were watching James Morrison on the screen, his figure hunched over Margaret's keyboard. But as they watched, the truth revealed itself in agonizing detail. James wasn't accessing her files. He was photographing them. The video quality was poor, but Margaret could see him using an old flip phone to snap pictures of her screen. And on that screen, visible for just a moment before he heard footsteps and closed the window, was a section of code. "The sabotaged code. Zoom in on his face," Margaret whispered, the image pixelated. But the expression was clear. Not guilt, not greed. Fear. Pure, desperate fear. "He was trying to warn you," Derek said quietly, understanding dawning in his voice. "That's why he kept saying there was something you needed to know." Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd spent 3 years clawing her way to the top of this company, building a reputation for being decisive, uncompromising, and sharp. She'd fired a man who was trying to save lives. "Where does he live?" she asked. James Morrison's apartment was in a neighborhood Margaret had driven past 1,000 times but never really seen. The building was tired but dignified, like the man himself. She climbed the stairs alone, ignoring Derek's protests about safety and lawsuits and corporate liability. She knocked on apartment 4B. The door opened a crack, held by a chain. "Mr. Morrison, I need to speak with you." "I don't work for you anymore, Miss Chen. Please. Flight 447. You were right." The chain slid free. James opened the door, and Margaret saw the small apartment behind him, neat as a pin despite its worn furniture. On the wall hung a photograph, a younger James in an Air Force uniform standing beside a massive aircraft. "You were military," Margaret said, surprised. 22 years, avionics specialist. Worked on some of the most advanced systems in the world. He gestured for her to sit, old-fashioned courtesy overriding whatever anger he must have felt. "After I got out, nobody wanted to hire a 50-year-old veteran with outdated clearances. Except your janitorial contractor. But you knew about the sabotage." "How?" James poured her a glass of water, his hands steady. "I empty the trash in engineering every night. 3 weeks ago, I found torn-up printouts in Marcus Webb's bin. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I recognized some of the code structures from my military days." "Something was wrong!" Margaret's breath caught. Marcus Webb was her star engineer, the architect of the new autopilot system. "I started paying attention," James continued, "watching when he worked late, which files he accessed. I'm invisible to people like him, just the janitor. He never noticed me. But I noticed him making changes, running tests that weren't logged, deleting his tracks. Why didn't you go to HR? Or the FAA?" James laughed, a sound without humor. "Who would believe the janitor? I tried to tell my supervisor, but he said I was overstepping. Said I'd be fired if I started making accusations about engineers. So I waited, gathered evidence. When I saw the flight schedule on your screen 2 nights ago, I realized 447 was the test flight. I was running out of time." Margaret closed her eyes. Every assumption she'd made about this man had been wrong. "The plane didn't crash," she said. "But 50 people almost died because I was too proud to listen." "You didn't know. I should have asked. Should have given you a chance to explain." Margaret leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, James, I need your help. Marcus Webb has disappeared. We think he sabotaged other systems too. You're the only person who knows what he was doing, how he was thinking." James was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and pulled a jacket from the closet. "The Air Force taught me something," he said. "You don't abandon your post just because someone doesn't respect your rank. You do the job because it matters." They worked through the night, James and Margaret side by side in the engineering lab. He guided her through the code, explaining in patient detail what Marcus had done and where else he might have hidden his digital time bombs. The other engineers, initially skeptical of taking direction from a janitor, quickly recognized the depth of James's knowledge. By dawn, they'd found and neutralized 3 more sabotage points. The FAA was notified. Marcus Webb was arrested trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands, $500,000 from a competitor in his offshore account. A week later, Margaret stood before the Apex Aviation Board of Directors. "I'm recommending several changes," she said. "First, a comprehensive review of our security protocols. Second, mandatory ethics training for all personnel. Third, the creation of a new position, Director of Safety Integration. This person will have clearance to review all systems, access all departments, and report directly to me with any concerns." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "I'm recommending James Morrison for the position." The chairman raised an eyebrow. "The janitor?" "The veteran avionics specialist with 22 years of military experience who saved 50 lives and our company's future. The man who tried to do the right thing even when no one would listen." Margaret met each board member's eyes. "The man I failed to see because I was too focused on titles and credentials to recognize actual expertise and character." The vote was unanimous. 3 months later, Margaret found James in his new office, modest by executive standards, but with a window overlooking the runway. He was reviewing maintenance logs, the same careful attention he'd once given to trash bins. "You were right," she said from the doorway, "about trust being everything." James looked up and smiled. "You know what I learned in 17 years of cleaning offices, Ms. Chen? Everyone leaves traces of who they really are. In the trash they throw away, the hours they keep, the way they treat people they think don't matter. You just have to be willing to look." "I'm looking now," Margaret said. really looking at everything I missed before. She'd learned something those 3 months, too. That titles didn't measure worth. That the people you overlooked might be the ones who saved you. That second chances weren't just for the people you'd wronged. They were for yourself. To become someone who saw clearly, who listened, who understood that every person in every role had dignity and value. James Morrison had taught her that, not through words, but through the quiet grace of a man who chose kindness even when faced with dismissal, who chose duty even when offered resentment, who chose to help even when he had every right to walk away. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. Sometimes the people we dismiss are the ones we need most. And sometimes it takes almost losing everything to finally see what was there all along, the extraordinary humanity in the ordinary people we pass every day, barely noticing, never really seeing until we do.